This is the All Rev'd Up podcast, and we are coming to you with a special episode on Roe v. Wade and Black folk. I'm Reverend Emmett Price.
And I'm Reverend Irene Monroe.
Irene, the last few months have been riddled with a host of challenges, and yet we, you and I, still rise. We've risen from illnesses, we have risen from non-COVID related deaths of close family members, and still we rise.
Indeed we do. And you know what they say, there's this adage that a setback is a setup for a comeback. And what better way to come back and do what we love tremendously, which is the podcast.
Absolutely. We certainly love this podcast, and we are back with a special episode which will set up our season 5, which is coming. Irene, before we talk about Roe v. Wade and the impact on Black folk, let us thank each of our listeners and viewers. Thank you for listening to us on the various podcast apps and for watching the actual live recording of the podcast on our YouTube channel. We are grateful for your support, your encouragement, your feedback, your reviews, and your comments. Thank you so much for sharing the podcast with others.
Indeed. And I thank you for your patience, because many of you have asked, where are you? And we said we have some family crisis. And so I thank you for your prayers, your well wishes, and being with us at this moment. But before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our genius producers, Kyla Wright and Cavante Small. It's good to see them too now.
I know that's right.
Good evening, everyone. We begin the readout tonight with a giant step backwards for women as free people in America.
On May 2nd, 2022, Politico released the first citing of a leaked draft of Justice Samuel Alito's majority opinion that was circulating within the court in February. Responding to the Dobbs v. Jackson case in Mississippi, the Supreme Court on June 24th, 2022, upheld Mississippi's Gestational Age Act with a 6-3 vote, thereby overruling Roe v. Wade, which was decided back on January 22, 1973. Irene, this is a defining moment in our national history and a cataclysmic moment for Black folk.
Oh my God.
How are you reflecting on this moment?
You know, I feel so many ways about it. I have such visceral reactions because I remember in 1973 being a teenager when Roe v. Wade became the law of the land here. But I have to quote, Emmett, our former House Rep Barney Frank, who gave a wonderful depiction about how people who are pro-life about this issue. He says that for these folks, life begins at conception and ends at birth here. But there's a bigger issue here, and I'm very glad that we're narrowing in on particularly our community, because one of the things that we don't quite understand is that even though we had abortion rights, Black women didn't always have access to it. As a matter of fact, the overturning of Roe v. Wade in many ways for me reinscribes Black women's bodies as chattel slavery. And I want to just go back and just give you a little bit about that. Because one of the things that when we're talking about abortion, we're really talking about reproductive justice. And it has to be an integrated, intergenerational, and intersectional way to understand how Black women come into this conversation, but have been intentionally, even in the best of efforts, have been marginally pushed out of the decisions, important decisions that would bring about important health care towards women. So one of the things is that Black women's lives have always just, bodies have always been used for medical experimentation. And I'm not being hyperbolic about it, because Marion Sims, the father of gynecology, he used slave women without anesthesia. Can you imagine? No, I can't. During surgical practices here. I'm so glad that finally in Central Park, they took down his statue here. But I talk about it in this way, because when we're talking about it, we're talking not only about cisgendered women, we're talking about trans men, we're talking about non-binary people, we're talking about Black women never really having control over their bodies here. And so, and abortion is just too narrow in this way. Because if you're really interested in Black women having bodily autonomy and good health, let's talk about maternity. That's number one. We have a much higher maternity rate than any group of women. Let's also talk about Black women who are pregnant in our penal system. Let's talk about contraception, and one particular contraception is used by Black women because we disproportionately have a high percentage of lupus. So my thing is that when it comes to talking about how catastrophic something is or how it's going to hurt women, we always kind of lean on Black women to highlight that point. But when you hear our voices about what needs to be done from the moment that we are pregnant to the time that we give birth is ignored. I'll give you a classic example here. We once thought, or people believe, that the reason why Black women had high maternity death had a lot to do with income and education, that socioeconomic index. But someone like Serena Williams talked about the difficulty she had. So it talks about something systemically problematic here. So from birth, from conception to birth, it's never been an issue that the medical society and even the women advocating for abortion have really included the particular lives of Black women and what we need. Because my point is, if you're interested in me getting abortion, it says a couple of things here. One is that the way it's spun, it's like, well, Black women need abortions because we're promiscuous. Black women need abortion because Black men rape disproportionately than any other group. Black women, it's always done in a kind of a negative, pathological kind of lens here. And so I have just been concerned about the spinning of the narrative, but it's not to get away from the fact that, yes, indeed, it will impact us like everything else impacts us and continue to.
Yeah, I mean, these tropes are absolutely horrific and hideous because they are literally lies. They are, as Maya Angelou would say, bitter, twisted lies. And the reality is that we, as human beings, should never dispossess ourselves of the one thing that we have agency of, which is our human existence, our embodied existence. So the whole notion of, telling a woman, first of all, what she can and can't do, whether cisgendered or not, cisgendered, is a whole nother issue. But the whole thing about the Black community, these lies that you've mentioned already, Irene, are just absolutely they're ridiculous. Particularly when we think about the thing about adoption, as if white folks need to be saviors of Black children who I mean, it gets me fired up when I think about the lies that have been told in order to get the lobby, in order to get to the place where the Supreme Court can make this decision.
Yeah, it's harmful.
Yeah.
You know why? Because it strips us of our agency to actually have the kind of reproductive justice and care that is specialized to the particular needs to Black women, no matter what socioeconomic strata that they're on. So that's what bothers me. Of course, and the thing is, yes, women who have means will definitely seek abortions. I saw that at Wellesley College. These white. So it's to get away from the fact that no, it's not that we're more promiscuous than any group of women. We just don't have access to the roots, to the kind of care we need should we need an abortion or other kinds of care around reproductive justice. The other thing that bothers me, it's interesting because yes, there will be back alley abortions. It was very interesting. In 1969 to 1973, there was the Jane movement, and that was particularly, in Chicago. It was an underground movement providing, services, for women who need abortions. But what I want to do with this conversation here is that I think as ministers here, and I'm surprised, I have to say, Emmett, that many more sister ministers have not really come and lend their voice on this issue here. But I want to talk about it because, again, the way to me it is spun in the news, we're a problem. You see, they're gonna have a problem like nobody else is gonna have a problem with abortion, but black women. And I want us
Hmm.
to talk about this because to me, I mean, this falls under the bigger rubric of that politic of silence. We don't talk
Yeah.
about our sexuality. We don't talk about our bodies. And given the iconography of both black bodies and black sexuality that is shaped in this dominant culture, it's this here moment in many ways strips us of agency. I was surprised to not see many more sisters out in the street saying, okay, pretty much because we knew it was coming down, it was leaked, but even before it was leaked, they were always chipping away at Roe v. Wade, that to the point that even if they didn't overturn it, I'm gonna be honest with you, it would have just been a shell of itself.
Yeah, I mean, you make some great points, and I want to have this conversation. We're going to take a quick break. And for all of our listeners who are concerned about me not talking as much as Irene today, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. She's closer to this topic than I am. It's not going to happen. So y'all just going to have to listen to the next episode if you want to hear me talk as much as Reverend Irene. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. We'll be right back.
It affects people with low incomes, Black, brown, indigenous, people of color, folks who already are living at the margins. Those are going to be the people who are most harmed.
Our opening sound came from Joy Reid of The Readout. You just heard Alexis McGill Johnson, CEO of Planned Parenthood Federation of America. This is the All Rev'd Up podcast. Irene, before we cut off and took a break, you were talking about a nuanced way of having this conversation, particularly with respect to the impact on Black folk. Let's move into that area, particularly as two reverends who are quite disturbed. I should say both of us are quite disturbed by the Supreme Court's weaponization of this decision. That's my wording. And the notion that not enough faith leaders are able to nuance this. Of course, we know that, one of the 10 commandments is thou shalt not kill. And church folk have continually used that to suggest why God is not pleased with abortion. Blasey blaza. We can parse that later. But also the notion is that there is a deeper, more nuanced impact of what happens when you have people who have been robbed of access, robbed of agency, robbed of being able to tell their own narratives and make their own decisions by court action. So it's one thing to be in a place and not feel like you can do something because people are looking at you. It's another thing to feel like you can't do something because the Supreme Court of the United States of America tells you that you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I so agree with you. I think, it's a couple of things. When you go to see your gynecologist, you want your gynecologist and yourself, perhaps maybe your loved one, but you don't want the state in. The room is crowded enough. And so if
Mhm.
you put the state in there, okay, we can't have the kind of health care and make the kind of decisions. But the question, I guess, what bothers me on a very, very deep level here, I mean, it doesn't, like I said earlier, it doesn't relegate me to second-class citizenship. It relegates me to chattel slavery. What
Yeah.
it's saying that I don't have the right, the bodily autonomy, I don't have the privacy, that my body belongs to the state. Now, we come from a people who understand that. We
Mhm.
understand that. And so that's what bothers me about it. I think what else bothers me about it is that we saw this coming down before it even before the link. It's interesting to hear the voices, particularly, I have to say this, Emmett, of white women speaking on behalf of sisters, never
Mhm.
making any gestures towards a kind of sisterhood. I just want to know, where are you when I'm saying, look, I'm having a difficult pregnancy here. You need to help me have this baby. Look, can you come in there and talk to this man or woman? Because systemically, the medical system, doesn't and makes us invisible. I'm just concerned about why all of a sudden I'm front and center, meaning as a Black woman, okay,
Mhm.
and so too are Black men, Black trans men, and
Mhm.
non-binary people. We are
Mhm.
front, but when it came to a kind of sisterhood here, okay, of if you're concerned about women's rights, and our right to have a baby and our right to have an abortion and our right to contraception, where was it? Where were you then? Because to me, you fall into the trope about Black women and their sexual behavior. That's what they see that as. So I'm troubled by it. I mean, I'm older now. It's for a younger generation. I was a teenager when it was, ratified into law across the country. But it does bother me because it is in those rural areas, those marginal areas. It will be a crime to go to travel out of state at some point. The doctor that, and I think many of us have heard of the 10-year-old poor child that was raped and had to go to Indiana, and now they're going to go after the doctor. So we're in a kind of witching state here. Like, you're supposed to tell on anyone who, it's, you know what it is? It's the Handmaid's Tale. I wish now, I wish that would be fiction, but it's become reality.
You can also do a citizen's arrest. I mean, this literally gets back to this gets right back to slavery.
Chattel slavery. That's right.
Chattel slavery. You're exactly right. Where if I see something that I think is wrong, let me just say it this way, as a white citizen,
yeah,
right? I have the right to interject myself in somebody else's business under the rubric of the law.
Right.
And to make a decision that has nothing to do with it.
It's another form.
Well, of course it is.
It's another form of policing the mobility, the bodily privacy and right of Black people. I really do. I see this as another form because we're talking about Black women. So who's going to be traveling now? So I feel like now, Emmett, if I come to Framingham to visit you, I might. Well, I'm too old. That would be a miracle. but nonetheless, though, I feel like now my traveling out of state, or my daughter, or my granddaughter, or the young sort of women that I mentor and stuff, we will now be suspects. I know this is not the kind of conversation that people have been hearing about it, but I want them to hear about how it feels to be Black, and then to have this here. Be reinscribed. It's not new, be reinscribed in a different way under the rubric of abortion, but it's the policing of black bodies once again. And the whole point about it wasn't great help to us when it was law. Now it's not. Now it's unlawful. A greater headache for us. A greater headache for us. I'm just upset. I'm just upset. And I just want to say,
I could tell.
Yeah, and I just need to say, because I have a lot of friends who have lupus. Okay, that is a problem with Black and brown women in particular. I have a lot. They cannot get their contraception medicine because that medicine is an anti-inflammatory, and it bothers me to hear them, talk about, what do I do now? Do I go out of state to try to get the medicine, to get a contraception pill? It is just unbelievable.
I mean, it absolutely is. And, usually I can try to calm you down, but there's nothing to calm down for this. I mean, I'm upset with you. I'm upset with so many beloved. And for those of us who are cisgendered men, I think we need to wake up. And I think we need to stand beside our Black women, whether cisgendered or non-cisgendered or non-binary, and allow ourselves to be allies and to be supportive, to be encouraging, and to leverage our voice on behalf of our community.
Thank you.
Having said that, let me share our final word for today. It was Marguerite Annie Johnson who not only solved the riddle of why the caged bird sings, but who also gave us the poetic anthem of Black America, Still I Rise. Known as Maya Angelou, she leveraged her once mute voice to loudly and proudly call the world to be a better place for everyone. From the bitter, twisted lies of white supremacist ideologies to spotlighting the diamonds at the meeting of her thighs, Maya taught us that like dust, like air, and like the dreams and hopes of the slave, we rise. So if we rise, why would we ever subjugate ourselves to moving backwards, to a history of oppression, backwards to a history of male chauvinistic, homo, and transphobic policies and inhumane treatment of our beloved. If we are rising like dust, air, and the dreams and hopes of the slave, why would we ever settle as if the wind beneath our wings evaporated? To all our beloved who feel unseen, we, these two Revs, we see you, and we challenge you to rise as we rise. To all who feel abandoned, ostracized, disenfranchised, and left behind, we call you and we call upon you to be courageous and to stand up so that you can be counted in the rising tide of loving beings who refuse to go back to the hush harbors to sing our freedom songs under the cover of the night. Courthouses will never be supreme when we, the people, stand up and speak our truths, all of them, to power. So like Maya, does our sassiness upset you? Did you want to see me broken? Does my haughtiness offend you? Does my sexiness upset you? If they do, then this may too. On the pulse of the morning, freedom, liberation, healing, hope, well-being, restoration, reconciliation, rehabilitation, and yes, Irene, reparation
Amen.
is coming.
Yes, indeed.
And you can't stop it. So you too should rise with us and join this movement of love, of peace, and of equality so that we can truly say, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
Ashe.
And amen. All Rev'd Up is brought to you by us, the Revs. Our amazing producers are Kyla Wright and Cavante Smalls.
Music for this episode is from Reverend Price's son and musical prodigy, Emmett G. Price IV. All Rev'd Up is distributed by GBH.
Additional thanks to Bob Kenneth, Elizabeth O'Brien, May He, Devin Robbins, Meredith Neerman, and Zach Waldman.
If you like what you hear, let us know. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts and follow us at All Rev'd Up Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube.
Feel free to send us a note, a question, or a comment to allrev'duppod@gmail.com. We'll be back